of the day was to check on the staff, see their reaction, and because you don't want to be battling against them or anything, and they were all, for...
This is the sad life of a man who once conquered Europe, then forgot where he lived. His name was Bob Paisley. He was the greatest manager in English football history. He won 6 league titles, 3 European Cups, and lifted trophies across the continent. Yet, in his final years, he couldn't remember any of it. He sat in a nursing home, looking at photographs of himself holding trophies. But the man in the picture was a stranger to him. This is not just a story of sadness. It's a story of a brave man who gave everything to football, and everything he gave came with a hidden cost. If you love football stories like this, give this video some hype, share it, like it, comment. It helps more people discover legends like Bob Paisley. Let's tell his story. To understand Bob Paisley's tragedy, we must go back to where he came from. He was born on January 23rd, 1919, in Hetton-le-Hole, County Durham. This wasn't a town of academies. It was coal dust and hard work. When Bob turned 13, he left school. He didn't go to a fancy football academy. He went into the mines with his father. Later, he became a bricklayer. He built houses with his own hands. This background made him tough and strong, but it also gave him a chip on his shoulder. When his wife Jessie's father first met Bob, he wasn't impressed by his football dreams. He only warmed to him when he learned he had a proper job as a bricklayer. A man needed real work, real skills, real strength. But Bob Paisley had talent. In 1938, he helped Bishop Auckland win the Amateur Cup. He was good, he was ready, so he tried to join the big clubs. He tried Sunderland, the team he loved as a boy. They rejected him. He tried Wolverhampton Wanderers. They rejected him too. The reason was always the same. He was too small. This rejection would change everything about how he played. If he couldn't compete on size, he would compete on courage. If the big clubs wouldn't have him, he would prove them wrong. He would play with reckless bravery. But this bravery came with a price nobody understood at the time. In May 1939, Liverpool Football Club signed the young Bob Paisley. He was 20 years old. The fee was £25. His wages were 8 shillings a week. Bob arrived at Liverpool Exchange Station full of hope. He met famous players. He was ready to start his career. Then, 4 months later, the world changed. War was declared. Everything stopped. The 1939 to 1940 season was cancelled. Bob Paisley's prime years, ages 20 to 26, were stolen. He missed 6 entire seasons of professional football. While his dreams sat on hold, he was conscripted into the Royal Artillery. He joined the 73rd Medium Regiment. He became a soldier. He became a desert rat. The North African campaign was brutal. Bob wasn't playing football, he was firing shells. He was serving in the 8th Army under Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. He was fighting against Rommel's Afrika Korps in the dust and heat of El Alamein. While footballers back home in Britain played wartime matches, Bob Paisley was learning to operate anti-tank guns. He was exposed to extreme heat. He suffered from dysentery like many soldiers. Food was scarce. The Luftwaffe dropped bombs from above. This was not the environment for preserving an athletic career. This was survival. But something remarkable happened in June 1944. Allied forces pushed north into Italy. The Germans were falling back. Cities were being liberated. And Bob Paisley rode into Rome on the back of a tank. This moment would become the most poetic part of his entire life. A soldier from County Durham riding into Rome on a tank, liberating it from fascism. 33 years later, in 1977, Bob Paisley would return to Rome. But this time, he didn't ride on a tank. He rode on a team bus surrounded by thousands of Liverpool fans waving red scarves. He was the manager of Liverpool Football Club. They were there to win the European Cup. When Liverpool beat Borussia Mönchengladbach 3-1, Bob Paisley had reached the pinnacle of football. The soldier who liberated Rome with guns had conquered Rome with football. The symmetry was perfect. But the tragedy was that he would eventually forget both moments. In 1945, at age 26, Bob Paisley returned to England. He had missed 6 years. He had to make up for lost time. He signed with Liverpool, but he was not the same Bob Paisley who had left in 1939. He was hardened. He was driven. He was reckless. He played with absolute unflinching style. He was described as tremendously strong and rugged. His teammate Billy Liddell said Bob was an honest grafter, a worker, a man who gave everything. But there was something dangerous about the way Bob Paisley played. He played with reckless bravery. He didn't care about getting hurt. He threw himself into every tackle, every header, every collision. Contemporary reports describe him as fearless in the face of physical danger. He admitted he might hurt people and get hurt, and he viewed this as part of the game. This aggressive style was a response to his height. He was small, so he had to be brave. What made this even more dangerous was the football itself. The balls used in the 1940s and 1950s were nothing like modern footballs. They were made of thick leather. In dry conditions, they were heavy. In wet conditions, which were common in England, the leather absorbed water. A wet leather ball was extremely heavy. When a player kicked such a ball with force, it became a dangerous projectile. When Bob Paisley headed these balls, he was heading something that could cause serious damage. Modern medical research has shown something unknown in Bob's time. Heading a heavy ball repeatedly causes what is called subconcussive impact. Each impact is not necessarily a knockout blow, but it causes injury to the brain. Over time, these repeated impacts damage the brain in ways that don't show up immediately. They damage it in ways that take decades to emerge. The condition is called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. It causes memory loss, confusion, and eventually dementia. The historical record shows specific moments when Bob Paisley suffered serious head injuries. These moments were celebrated as toughness at the time. Now, we understand them as serious medical emergencies. One famous incident happened at Newcastle United in a match at St James's Park in the mid-1940s. A Newcastle player named Norman Dodgin kicked the ball with immense power. It struck Bob on the side of the head. The impact was so hard that it knocked him unconscious. What happened next is shocking by modern standards. Bob didn't go to hospital. He didn't get medical attention. At half-time, he was walked up and down outside the main grandstand. The staff were hoping he would wake up. Then, astonishingly, Bob returned to the pitch for the second half. He scored a goal with a header. This means he headed the ball again, further damaging a brain that was already badly injured. Later, he collapsed again, but the damage was done. This is a medical condition called second impact syndrome. When a brain receives a second injury before it has recovered from the first, the damage is catastrophic. It can lead to permanent brain injury. In Bob Paisley's case, it likely contributed to the Alzheimer's disease that would eventually destroy his mind. But in the 1940s, no one understood this. No one protected him. He was simply called brave. There was another incident at Derby County. During a match, Bob suffered a severe cut on his scalp. Blood was pouring from his head. A normal person would have gone to hospital. Bob went to the dressing room, had stitches put in with minimal anaesthetic, and went back out onto the pitch. Contemporary reports describe the wound bleeding throughout the second half. He kept playing. He kept heading the ball. He kept putting himself in danger. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern. Bob played with reckless bravery for 15 years. He played in an era when medical care for concussions didn't exist. The treatment was a sponge and water. He played with a heavy leather ball that caused repeated subconcussive impacts. He was small in stature, which meant his brain experienced higher forces during collisions. All these factors combined to create the perfect conditions for long-term brain damage. But at the time, nobody saw it that way. Bob Paisley was a hero. He was tough. He was brave. He was exactly what Liverpool fans wanted to see. They celebrated him. They loved him. They had no idea that his bravery was slowly damaging his brain, setting the stage for the tragedy that would come much later. In 1954, Bob Paisley retired from playing. His legs had given out, but his eyes were still sharp. He stayed at Liverpool and became a physiotherapist. This is where his true genius emerged. Bob had an almost supernatural ability to see injuries. He could watch a player walk a few paces and know exactly what was wrong. He could spot imbalances in movement that professional doctors missed. He knew when a player was hurting because he had spent a career hurting himself. His son Graham remembered this skill. Former players like Kenny Dalglish spoke about it. Bob could diagnose an injury just by watching how someone moved. This keen observational skill became the foundation of everything he would later achieve. He understood the human body. He understood pain. He understood what it took to play through injuries. When the legendary manager Bill Shankly resigned in 1974, the Liverpool board offered the job to Bob Paisley. Bob didn't want it. He was a man who preferred the shadows. He liked working in the boot room, where Liverpool's coaches gathered to discuss tactics. He had no interest in fame or attention. He urged the board to find someone else, but they insisted. Bob accepted the role, but reluctantly. It turned out to be one of the best decisions Liverpool ever made. Between 1974 and 1983, Bob Paisley transformed Liverpool into the greatest club in Europe. He won 6 league titles. He won 3 European Cups. He won 3 League Cups. He won the UEFA Cup. He won 6 Charity Shields. He won the UEFA Super Cup. In just 9 years as manager, he won more trophies than most managers win in a lifetime. He did it without ego. He did it quietly. He did it by understanding the game and the players in a way that nobody else could. The pinnacle came in May 1977. Liverpool reached the European Cup final in Rome. For Bob Paisley, this was more than just a football match. He was returning to the city he had liberated as a soldier in 1944. He was returning to the city where he had ridden on a tank, where he had fought for freedom. Now he was returning as a manager to conquer the continent with football. When Liverpool won 3-1, Bob Paisley had reached the absolute peak of his life. He sat quietly in the stadium, not celebrating loudly like other managers might. He was reflecting on the journey from a mining town in County Durham to Rome, from a soldier firing shells to a manager lifting trophies, from a small boy rejected by big clubs to the greatest manager in English football history. But the tragedy is that he would eventually forget this moment. The memory of Rome in 1977 would be stolen from him. In 1983, Bob Paisley retired as manager. He was at the top. He had achieved everything. He stepped aside at the moment of his greatest success. He stayed on as an advisor, but his intensity began to fade. In the late 1980s, people close to him noticed something. His mind wasn't as sharp. He was forgetful. At first, it seemed like normal aging. He was in his late 60s. But for a man whose entire identity was based on his memory and his ability to see details, this decline was alarming. Bob had spent his entire career at Liverpool remembering things. He remembered how players moved. He remembered matches from decades ago. He remembered tactics and strategies. Now, he was starting to forget. The family noticed it getting worse. Then came a moment that told them something was seriously wrong. Bob had driven from Anfield to his home in Woolton thousands of times. He had been at Liverpool for 44 years. This was a route he could drive with his eyes closed. It was muscle memory. It was part of his identity. But in the early 1990s, something terrible happened. Bob got in his car to drive home, and he forgot the way. His wife Jessie remembered this moment. The man who had built Liverpool, who had managed thousands of matches, who had conquered Europe, suddenly didn't know how to get home from Anfield. The map of the city he had lived in since 1939 had disappeared from his mind. This was the moment the family knew that he was facing a battle he could not win. Bob Paisley was eventually diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. At the time, very few people understood the connection between heading footballs and dementia. His condition was seen as just bad luck, just a tragedy of aging. No one connected it to the countless headers he had made in his youth. No one connected it to the heavy leather balls of the 1940s and 1950s. His illness was viewed as a mystery, not as the result of his brave playing style. In 1992, ill health forced him to resign his position on the board. After nearly 50 years at Liverpool Football Club, he had to step away. The club he had built continued to win without him, but the architect of that success was losing his mind. The man who had remembered everything could now remember nothing. In 1993, a journalist named Stan He wrote to Bob, hoping to get comments for an article about the Kop. Jessie Paisley replied. Her words were heartbreaking. She wrote that Alzheimer's had wiped away all memory of his achievements. Bob didn't know he had won 3 European Cups. He didn't know he was the most successful manager in English football history. He didn't recognise the faces of the players he had made into legends. The final years of Bob Paisley's life were spent at Arncliffe Court, a nursing home in Halewood. The contrast was enormous. This was not the man at Anfield on great European nights. This was a frail man in a nursing home, slowly disappearing. But the family did something beautiful. They hung a photograph on the wall of his room. It was Bob holding the First Division trophy. It was a reminder of who he had been. For visitors and staff, the photograph explained who this quiet man was. But for Bob himself, the man in the photograph was a stranger. One moment stands out